This is Cutting Through, the podcast for corporate digital communicators. You've probably heard about web sustainability, the idea that the internet has a carbon impact greater than certain countries, and that if we all work together to do digital communication more sustainably, those efforts can have real impact. But do you have a plan to make that happen? Where should you begin? And is it even possible to communicate sustainably in a time of AI and its famously energy goblin footprint? We'll dig into these and many other questions in this episode of Cutting Through. I'm Jonathan Holt, Head of Strategic Insights at Bowen Craggs, here with Scott Payton, Chief Executive. And together, we know a bit about this topic since it's one of the benchmarking metrics in the Corporate Digital Communications Index. But it's a real privilege to have with us a true expert in the field of web sustainability, Tim Frick. Tim's credentials in this area are huge. For the past 12 years, he's co-chaired the World Wide Web Consortium Sustainable Web Group, where he's been instrumental in creating and evolving sustainability guidelines for the web. He helps organizations communicate more sustainably through Mightybytes, the Chicago-based agency that he founded, and he's also literally written the book on web sustainability. Tim, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, Tim, I wonder if you would tell us how you personally came to be so involved in web sustainability. It's quite a niche cause to tie yourself to, and one that you've managed to be very influential within. So how did you get there?
Yeah, thanks. It's when you think about things like, ecological overshoot and climate change and kind of all of these big things, it gets to be pretty overwhelming. And I was very much in that spot in the early 2010s. And, also as an individual, can make you feel very helpless. Like, this is a big, huge worldwide global problem. What can my little agency of a few people do to even impact anything? And I was thinking about a lot of those things, and we discovered B Corp certification. And so the company became a certified B Corp in 2011. And that's, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's basically a rigorous certification that helps companies adhere to very high levels of transparency and accountability around social, ecological, and economic impact. And so we went through that certification. It was eye-opening. The process itself was eye-opening. And around the same time, there were all these reports coming out about the ecological and environmental impact of the internet, and that it was huge, and that it was bigger than some countries' impact and all that kind of stuff. And we were like, well, that's kind of what we build for a living. So maybe we can do something there. Maybe that might be the area where we can actually make a meaningful or even a measurable difference. And so we started exploring what that actually meant and what that could mean. And more importantly, if we're doing it and there are almost 500,000 agencies around the world, if other agencies started doing it too, that could be like a very large collective impact around this kind of thing. So we spent years working on processes and practices and all of this kind of stuff. And as you mentioned earlier, started a group within the World Wide Web Consortium that at the time was just a community group, but then turned into an interest group to create the web sustainability guidelines. And so, over time, we've been able to create all of these kind of assets and resources for organizations to follow suit with the things that we're doing.
That's been a years-long commitment then, and people may be familiar with World Wide Web Consortium because of the accessibility guidelines that have also emanated from there, and which have gradually become more and more official, with now being baked into law in many countries in different ways.
Yep.
And I think that's the idea behind these guidelines. So, what's the latest on the web sustainability guidelines?
Sure. Yeah. And you're spot on. I mean, I think if you've used the web, you've been impacted some way, shape, or form by the World Wide Web Consortium's work. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, kind of all of the baseline open standards of the web have been they've influenced greatly. And as you mentioned, accessibility was huge and has been around for 25 years now. And the European Accessibility Act and other countries around the world have already started incorporating those guidelines into standards and regulations and legislative guidance and all that kind of stuff. Our goal with the World Wide Web Consortium's web sustainability guidelines was to essentially do the same thing, but for sustainability. The idea being that, we could learn from both the successes and mistakes that W3C has, the accessibility guidelines have made. There's a group there that's, we've met with multiple times to actually learn from them and understand what to do, what not to do. They've been super helpful in giving us some guidance around that kind of stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, the group was started originally in 2013 to share resources, to just say, like, I'm thinking about sustainability. Are there any resources around? And in 2013, there really weren't. And so for us, it was like, all right, well, and then let's start to create some of those resources and find like-minded individuals and build community around those resources. And, by the time the pandemic rolled around and people started being marginally cognizant of the fact that we're spending all of our time online and that all uses electricity, and that there generally tends to be a little bit more of an awareness around the impact of our digital products and services in daily lives and stuff. The number of resources related to that by 2021 versus 2013 was just overwhelming. It was a much, much larger group of academic papers and studies and blogs and, all kinds of resources. So at that time, we decided the time was finally ripe to create these guidelines, to basically collect all that knowledge and distill it down into a set of recommendations that, digital teams and businesses could use to, create better products and services that incorporate sustainability principles into design, development, product management, et cetera.
I want to bring in Scott and ask you if you would recap a bit about Bowen Craggs' journey in relation to this area of communication. I mentioned earlier that we have a benchmarking metric that focuses on this. Where did that begin, and where have we gotten to?
Yeah. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Tim. Thanks, Tim, for joining us. So our web sustainability journey began in 2022, I think. So it was around Bowen Craggs' 20th birthday as a company, and we got to know Tim and some others, and we were just starting to kind of recognize that a lot of our clients at the time were unveiling big company-wide climate change strategies, and it seemed important for those companies to be walking the walk in all aspects of their communications activities, as well as their other areas of their business. And clearly, we advise companies on their online channels, and those channels have a carbon footprint. They have an impact on the environment. So it seemed to make sense to incorporate an analysis of that as part of our kind of overall benchmarking activity. And what we discovered through working with Tim and others and learning more about this is there's a wonderful tight correlation between web sustainability and accessibility and good usability. So a lot of the things that makes a website easy to use, impactful, and it is tightly correlated with sustainability and accessibility. So it's been a great kind of fit, really, because there's lots of win-win-wins.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's a slow journey. I mean, it's been a percolation for people to, some people have more instantly kind of gotten it and wanted to excel in this area, and some, I think, have been a bit slower on the uptake. But there have definitely been, I think there have been some positive effects from Bowen Craig's advocacy, and a number of companies in our index have done some quite visible things to try and both raise awareness and improve their own impacts. But Tim, still, I think there are a lot of communicators out there that are probably new to this. And what would you advise someone who hasn't really started assessing and trying to improve their uh, web sustainability?
Sure. Yeah. I think the most important thing, and this was kind of what we did way back when as well, is just figuring out what it is, focusing on what it is that you can actually have impact on. That could be moving to a greener web host, or that could be making your page weight a little bit lighter. It could be a number of different things. And also, I think also important to understand who the other stakeholders in your organization working on sustainability are. Really, sustainability should be one of these things that weaves itself throughout the entire DNA of an organization, including its digital communications department. And so figuring out what other people are doing and understanding how that could or maybe doesn't align with the work that you're doing or want to do. And then just finding those kind of like-minded, values-aligned people who can start to kind of champion the cause. We've heard lots of organizations doing lunch and learns and kind of creating affinity groups like cross behavioral or cross departmental or cross functional teams around, advancing sustainability within an organization. And that looks differently for a digital team than say it does for a packaging team or a transportation and logistics team or whatever. However, the principles are generally the same. So understanding what you're already doing is a great way to, kind of know where you are today to figure out where you want to go tomorrow. So yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And then also just, it's a learning journey. Like sustainability is always a learning journey, and it's a constant focus on continuous improvement. So a lot of communicators especially have made the unfortunate mistake of like banging the drum on something without really understanding what it is that they're doing. I think back on like the was it COP28 website where they created a low carbon mode that you had to turn on, and I mean they just got a lot of like slack over that because of the fact that there was it wasn't really, it ended up being a form of digital greenwashing ultimately because they didn't make the commitment that was needed, and it was really just kind of a hat tip to this kind of stuff as opposed to like a fundamental core, which you would think for a climate change conference would be core to the being of the organization. And that's fine, they can evolve and again learn over time and make different mistakes and make better mistakes maybe.
Well, I know from some of our previous conversations that even you who spend so much time thinking about this have found that there's a bit of a dearth of live case studies of
Yeah.
websites that are doing this really, really well, who are not doing the greenwashing thing. So you've used your own website as a living case study. I wonder what you learned through that process that might be transferable for others who want to make some legitimate progress on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you for bringing that up, and I think that's a good example. I mean, Mightybytes has been around for, it'll be 28 years in February, and so we've been around for a while. We've made a lot of mistakes, so we've learned a whole lot of things. But you would think a 28-year-old web design firm would know a thing or two about designing websites, and yet here we were, faced with redesigning our own website, and we ended up deciding that learning needed to be a really core part of that journey, and that we were going to give ourselves a little bit of flexibility around that. And it ended up, we learned a ton of stuff, things that we thought we knew and just kind of, experimented with, and realizing how like finicky, for example, SVGs can be. Like that was just one thing that we were like, well, we typically had used SVGs when we could, but this site had both a light mode and a dark mode, and the SVGs needed to change color based on the mode that they were in, and so we had to programmatically change those based on the color mode. So there was a lot of kind of levels of complication that we went through and went through as part of that journey. And we probably could have just said, no, let's find a neutral color that will work in both. But we specifically wanted to experiment so that we could find the best possible way to make the most sustainable website as possible.
Well, interesting you mention dark mode, because that's one of the things that I think some people may wonder whether it is a form of greenwashing in itself, if it is put forward as, for
Right.
example, the sole act that someone is doing in order to try to depict seriousness there. I mean, do you think that that has a significant impact? And are we at a point where those initial efforts to do something, well, fairly simple, you've just told us how it can be quite complex, but are we moving beyond that initial stage in your view?
I'd like to think so. I think, I think dark mode is a good example of you know, things that could potentially be construed as greenwashing. It does reduce energy on some kinds of screens, but not necessarily on others. So understanding the nuances of those things is a many layered onion. And so again, continuous learning journey. However, dark mode also works well for people with some visual disabilities better than light mode does. And so it gave us an opportunity as part of this process to, we created an accessibility control panel for the sustainable web design site. When we built that a few years ago, we decided to apply that to our own site. And so it gives you an opportunity to, highlight important, elements of web design like accessibility, which people might be a little bit more familiar with than, say, sustainability, which is a little bit more emergent. And so, being able to highlight those things and put them front and center in the interface and the UI and the experience, I think makes for it makes our website not just a marketing site, but also an educational tool. And so I think that anything that organizations can do to kind of foster that is going to be good in the long run.
Well, let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the implications of AI on web sustainability. A new era of corporate communications is here, and the good news is that the digital team is in the forefront like never before. The bad news is that the digital team is in the forefront like never before. At Bowen Craggs, we only do corporate digital communications advice, and we've got all eyes on the twists and turns and opportunity zones in this particular corner of communication, working with many of the world's largest corporate brands all over the world. For our latest insights on everything from AI search to how corporate estates are evolving, visit our website, bowencraggs.com. Scott, I wonder if you would like to take over and ask some questions about AI.
Yeah, I've got one question actually about the web sustainability guidelines, and I think that fascinates me. Well, first thing, I would definitely recommend that, if you're involved in building, managing a corporate website, do read those draft guidelines now, because they're full of kind of practical tips and advice. And I think just looking at I always see them as almost like the kind of the sibling to the accessibility guidelines that came before them. And if you look at those guidelines now, they are very much seen in the web industry as the standard by which every company is expected to meet those standards. Now there's the European Digital Accessibility Act, and there's a lot of it's a big deal. Companies, setting aside the moral obligation for companies to make their websites accessible, there's now kind of legal and regulatory requirements. Do you see, looking at the web sustainability guidelines, do you see that those guidelines following a similar path and actually kind of essentially becoming, down the line in the coming months and years, an internationally recognized standard by which all companies should meet?
That is the hope. I'm crossing my fingers here. Yeah, for sure. And I think, it also ties into the question about AI as well. That is changing so quickly and so fast. In fact, the version of the web sustainability guidelines that was released earlier today actually has 38 different, it has a new tag specifically for AI, and has 38 different points of reference within the guidelines that basically says, okay, lots of AI is delivered via the web. Here are some things that you can do to make more responsible choices around that. So I think they will, the idea would be that, both AI and web sustainability, can influence sustainability moving forward, can influence the future of the web. And also regulatory guidance is going to be key to that. And so, we're making sure that our guidelines are as rigorous as possible around that, and will be, during this horizontal review process, talking to regulators about what is meaningful for them. We, for the most part, historically have written them for practitioners who are building digital products and services, so that it's going to resonate very very well with them. And then those who manage, like product managers and marketers as well, those who manage digital projects and services. But those guidelines are going to need to resonate with legislators as well. They're going to need to be easy to understand for legislators to say, okay, well, I can wrap my head around this and make some regulatory guidance around this. And so it's a lot of spinning plates and a lot of goals, but I don't think any of them are conflicting. I think they're all, trying to move us in the right direction. That is just a better web that works works better for people and planet.
Yeah, and some of the clients that we've worked with that have made some headway in making their web presence more sustainable and more carbon efficient, they do seem to have found additional benefits from doing so, because the pages are faster loading. The information is easier to find. The pages don't have waffle or clutter or kind of window dressing. So there does seem to be and the end result is more accessible. So it does seem to be, again, this kind of win-win-win situation.
For sure. Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll share a story that's kind of related to that, because there's the obvious things of like, okay, lighter, faster pages, the things that, UX designers and web developers are going to focus on. But then there's the kind of day-to-day things. So this goes back to what we were, the kind of underlying as you're maintaining a website over time, these things come up and you're like, oh, what do we do about that? One of the last steps that we did in redesigning our website was to embed the email marketing newsletter sign up forms and stuff. And we realized at the end, is just as we were about to get to launch, that the forms that we were embedding were adding a 70 kilobyte font every time you added them to every page. And we had a page performance budget of 500 kilobytes. And we really wanted to get it down around, 250 to 350 for every page. And so that's a pretty tight, if you've ever designed website, that's not a lot of assets, and it's not, so you want to make sure that you're, making the most use. Well, we reached out to them, EcoSend, amazing B Corp, alternative to MailChimp kind of thing. And they were like, sure, yeah. And so what they did is they built a new feature that gave users the choice to use a system font, which would not put that 70 kilobyte transfer, or another number of other answers. So, that could potentially, just that one simple request where we were like, hey, can you help us with this page weight issue that we're having, now can go out to millions of page views because they're using that on all of their forms across their platform. And stuff. And so, there's those little things that come up on the, in the day-to-day care and maintenance of your product or service, that you're like, oh, you know what, there's a better way to do this. And maybe we can work with a partner. And scope 3 especially it's going to require partnerships. It's going to require cooperation and stuff like that. And so that's one of those examples of like, oh yeah, you can actually, partner up with really great organizations who are willing to work on this stuff with you. And then you actually create these kind of collective, outcomes, which are bigger than the sum of the parts.
And so to ask a massive, big existential question, what is the impact? What are the implications of this kind of explosion of generative AI on web sustainability? Is it a blessing or is it a curse, or is it a bit of both?
A threat and a gift, I think, is when we were prepping for this thing, was the words that came up, and I think it's both. I think without being a little bit more intentional and mindful in the way that we implement AI, and the various tools that incorporate it, we're running up against a big threat. But in the gift, it's also really, really powerful technology that is going to change digital communications, as you all have really dug deeply into. But it's going to change the world and every business in it, and all that kind of thing. And so figuring out how are we going to strike that balance between mindful and intentional, and not move fast and break things, but maybe move slower and plant things. And I think there's, like I said, it's both a threat and a gift. In every organization, for profit, nonprofit, company, association, whatever, is going to have to look at their own ecosystem, their own business ecosystem, and figure out what it is that they need to do in order to make their AI implementation, much of which is delivered via the web, so ultimately will be delivered via their website, more of a gift than a threat.
Yeah, I like moving slowly and planting things. Talking of people who are moving quickly and breaking things, the architects of the big AI search tools, the big AI chatbots, they are really transforming the way people interrogate the web to get in, and transforming the way people get information. Because if you
Right.
ask ChatGPT a question about a company in the first instance, you'll get the answer from in the chatbot rather than from the website. Do you have any kind of
Right.
thoughts on the implications of AI search specifically on all this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's very top of mind for all of our clients, and it's been top of mind for us for a while too. And I know that your last podcast episode was specifically dedicated to that topic. I think it's really evolving quickly, and so I think staying on top of that is going to be really, really key. Their clients are seeing um, drops in their traffic, and they're seeing that they're not getting the performance that they once did, and they make a lot of investment. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that they make huge investment in search optimization and driving qualified leads and revenue and all that kind of stuff through their website. And so that investment, when it starts to get undercut, gets to be a big, people pay attention, and so figuring out what you can do to, make sure that you're building websites in a way that is going to provide the information to chatbots and to AI tools and engines, and that, what is it, generative engine optimization. That's just going to be another add-on to what SEOs do on a pretty regular basis now anyway.
Yeah,
you know
I've been doing a lot of research into what how to kind of into AI search optimization and how to kind of ensure that AI bots highly rate and rank your content. And one thing that does seem to be a kind of a driver for AI search optimization in the sense of making things easy for AI bots is a light web pages that
right.
are fast loading. So yet again, there does seem to be some areas where there is a kind of pleasing correlation between AI search optimization and web sustainability.
Sure, and that wasn't. I mean, like, ever since Core Web Vitals, that has been an SEO thing anyway. So
Mm.
people who are already doing SEO and paying attention to page performance and page load and all of that kind of stuff shouldn't have to pivot in any major significant way. They're already doing, on at least in that part of their work, they're already doing the best practices that they should continue doing as they're moving forward on their
Mm.
on looking at how AI is going to impact their content.
You mentioned that there are new AI guidelines that have been launched as part of the Web Sustainability Guidelines. Can you give us just some brief insights into what's in there, what's being advised?
There's guidance in each of the categories. So the categories of the guidelines are user experience design, web development, hosting and infrastructure and systems, and product and business strategy. And so there are those 38 references that I mentioned are kind of sprinkled across those. So if you're a business leader and you're looking for, smart strategy tips around how to, choose good suppliers, for instance, that are more conscientious, there's going to be guidance for you there around that, specific to AI. There's also going to be product management guidelines. There's going to be user experience guidelines. It's really about, like, understanding the constantly moving world of AI and figuring out how best to apply that. And worth noting at this point to just say that, there's a lot of guidelines. There's, I think, almost 100 guidelines in the WSGs. And so the expectation is never to do all of them. That would be amazing if organizations can, but the idea is that, in the filtering system, using things like the AI tag is helpful for that, is to say, all right, what is it that I can impact now? What is important to me now? If I'm working on web development, are there specific AI guidelines for web developers? Yes, there are. So I can go in and look at those based on what's relevant to me. And the tagging system and the filtering system in the guidelines has grown robust over the past year, including the AI guidance. And so I think the idea being that, people want to understand what's most relevant to them, knowing that there's a lot of guidance for everybody out there, for all the kind of disciplines that I mentioned earlier, but that there's going to be people with very specific questions who come in and want to know a very specific thing about, whether that's AI or something related.
it's not just technology that is kind of changing the kind of the debate around web sustainability and sustainability generally. It's also humans. There's been in the last, I guess, 18 months, quite a significant, in some portions of society, in some parts of the world, a significant, robust backlash against ESG. While at the same time, other portions of societies kind of continue to place, to take sustainability seriously, and have high expectations around that one from a corporate perspective. But the debate around sustainability does seem to be pretty politically polarized at the moment. How has this impacted progress around web sustainability, do you think? And
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I live in the U.S. and so, and there is no place that's more evocative when it comes to that balance or that conundrum of ESG and DEI backlash and moving these things forward. I think we've definitely seen some of our clients web sustainability was something that they were interested in or intrigued in. And now it's just kind of like, yeah, well, we might get to that later on, but we're really not, it's not really a priority. And similarly with things like inclusive language and that kind of stuff, we've had one of our clients had to go in, and because they get federal funding in the US, they had to go in and they had to remove all sorts of references to certain types of people. And, that's just really, 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 really challenging. And just so that they could serve their community, which is the national community in the US of people with disabilities. And so like, that's really, really challenging when you look at those kinds of choices being made by communications leads around that kind of stuff. In that environment, things like optimizing your images on your website it's inevitable that they'll take a backseat. Things like web sustainability is like, yeah, that's I think where we've seen some success is helping people understand that sustainability isn't just about carbon emissions. It's not about carbon tunnel vision. It's not about just, it's much more about a holistic view of what's going to work better for everybody moving forward. And I think that makes it a lot easier to incorporate some of the social aspects and some of the economic aspects alongside the, purely ecological aspects of sustainability stuff. But yeah, it's definitely been a challenging environment for sure.
yeah, Jonathan, I know this is a topic close to your heart. Do you have any other thoughts or?
Well, in general, I think what we've been observing, and we've talked about it a lot on this podcast, is that the combined political pressures, the opposing political pressures that are coming at companies and communicators from different parts of the world are possibly having a formative, positive effect. I mean, there's a sort of threat to gift spectrum for what's happening in the world. Do you think that might be playing out here? I mean, is it possible that these guidelines and the ultimate adoption of them might be strengthened by the challenges, or is it just something that has to be weathered?
I think it's both. Honestly, I think it's inevitable. We're deep in it, especially here in the U.S. And so no matter what, you're going to have to wallow through the mire, regardless. However, I will say, like for instance, during the early pre-pandemic years, I'll put it that way. We were quite busy as a kind of more progressive organizations focusing on social impact. We, saw all of our clients rolling, hard into all of these things. And I think that backlash is, kind of that rebuttal of the backlash is going to be inevitable. I think, 2025 people are scrambling, especially in the US, to figure out how to make sense of all of this if they have to look at alternate means of funding, which is really what is going to kind of drive a lot of this, then they have to make some, decisions, whether that's slash and burn decisions or, possibly even rethinking their business models. If they're a nonprofit that was focused on philanthropy, now maybe they need to think about becoming a social enterprise that's focused on generating income and that kind of stuff. And so things are a little bit topsy-turvy there. And so things like web sustainability can get easily lost in the shuffle. However, there are passionate advocates. I think the B Corp community is a great example of that. The B Corp movement was started in the US and they have been really, really very vocal about this kind of anti-ESG and anti-DEI backlash, and said, no, that's not what we stand for. We stand for this other thing, which is a better way forward, and it is pro ESG and it is pro DEI and it is, and they have the data now that the B Corp movement is almost 20 years old. They have the data to back it up, to say, hey, these corporations that focus on these things actually perform better over time. When they look at the long-term value, they actually see that they're performing better over time. And so, the web sustainability guidelines full on embrace that kind of way of thinking. And so I think that ultimately, if you're, thinking about whether or not you might want to embrace web sustainability, now might be a great time to look at reevaluating, your relationship with your content, your relationship with your website, your relationship with AI, all those things, to think more intentionally and long term about that kind of stuff in the face of constant daily change. No pressure or anything.
As part of our kind of our benchmarking exercise, when we're trying to kind of evaluate the effectiveness of a company's online presence in all sorts of criteria, including web sustainability, we do kind of use as part of that process some kind of technical tools, and we're finding that some of them are that doesn't seem to be a single tool that is perfect at evaluating a company's web sustainability. It's including carbon efficiency. Are those tools getting better? The eco graders of this world or website carbon calculators? What's your recommendation in terms of using these tools?
Yeah, I mean, it's as part of our early journey, we launched EcoGrader in 2013.
Yeah.
And the idea was just to make it an awareness tool, and it's now 12 years later, and we've been continuing to evolve it. And the beta that we've got going on right now actually includes the web sustainability guidelines, and we'll continue to improve that over time. I think as the web sustainability guidelines get more awareness and more adoption, that people are going to be motivated to start incorporating them into the tools that they create. I also, EcoGrader really, makes a conscientious focus on the ESG, not just carbon, not just emissions. I mean, there's a lot of tools out there now that use the model that we had some time, spent some time working on, the sustainable web design model, that use that to kind of make estimates around website carbon emissions, and that's all good, and I think it's advancing the conversation forward, but it also needs to be done hand in hand with the kind of social and economic conversation. And so with EcoGrader, we're really focusing on how do you talk about performance and stuff like that, but also make sure that accessibility and data privacy and some of these other more social things don't get lost in the fray, because it's easy for that to happen. I think there's definitely room for improvement in a lot of the tools, but I think that's because things are changing so quickly, and that's fine.
Yeah,
Great.
They seem to be pretty. We've certainly found them to be incredibly useful indicators,
right.
Particularly if you again, because it's a benchmarking exercise, we're applying the same tool to 120 different websites, and that kind of does give you a very meaningful and useful comparative frame of reference, as well as measuring change over time.
But should people understand them as being imperfect tools, which are just part of the picture?
Right.
Because I know in some of our interactions with Bowen Craggs clients, the ones who are taking this particularly seriously, you can put a lot of effort in to trying to reduce page weights and all the rest, and feel like you've done a lot, and then there isn't always a direct correlation, seemingly, with what's going on. What these measurement tools show. So they're not perfect, but they are indicators.
Yeah, I think I mean emissions is a great example here because so many of them do focus on that, and you know, there the model that we worked on with the Green Web Foundation and Whole Grain Digital and a couple others, the sustainable web design model is attributional, which means it's rife with potential, you know, pitfalls or you know, it's not really an accurate, you know, estimate. And so we're really making sure that we're helping people understand that, like, you know, people do get really obsessed with the numbers. They get really like, they're really about like, I need to get either this number down if it's emissions or my score up and stuff like that. And we're really trying, as part of what we're doing, to incorporate into the discussion, you know, this is really an education and awareness building. It's a tool to help people start the conversations to say, hey, if we're really serious about this, maybe we need to think about a life cycle assessment. Maybe we need to think about something a little bit more rigorous than putting a URL into a field and getting a bunch of numbers back. You know, and you know, that's a perfect case scenario, right? I mean, like, if you're actually getting people to be really serious about this stuff, then they're realizing that it's time to roll their sleeves up, and that a tool like EcoGrader or any of the others, you know, they are is going to be helpful, but it's only going to be a starting point, you know.
Well, finally, I wonder what you think we should expect in 2026.
Well, we're going to release our notes, which is which is great. I think that is definitely a thing that's for at least we're looking forward to, and hopefully with the kind of guidance and backing of the entire World Wide Web Consortium membership. You know, having a W3C note will then in turn be able to reference and inspire and inform legislation, and you know, around the world in different places. I think, you know, here in the U.S., that's definitely something that we're looking at. There are, you know, people in legislation and lawmakers in the U.S. that are already trying to regulate AI, for instance, and trying to get some, you know, some responsible, you know, guidance around that kind of stuff. And so, you know, I think having our guidelines out there for the world to see can help those folks, to say, all right, well, you know, it's not just AI, it's also, you know, the web AI is delivered via the web. And so how do you address all of the parts of the system, including the web, you know? I think also we're going to, again, here in the US, it's going to be a political roller coaster. And so, you know, understanding just kind of that things are going to continue to change on a pretty regular basis. And so getting used to kind of emotional whiplash, you know, and just a kind of roller coaster ride of things that are happening right now. Is that's where things like organizational agility and that kind of stuff are really play important roles, because there's going to be a lot of unpredictable stuff that happens in 2026 that you know, organizations are going to need to figure out, all right, how do I do this and how do I do it quickly, and that's especially important for communicators who are going to be creating the stories and telling the stories around this stuff. And so being able to kind of like, you know, build community and create content strategy on the fly and all of that kind of stuff is going to be, you know, incredibly important. And hopefully things like our guidelines can help with that.
Well, the idea of going slow and planting things seems like a perfect metaphor for how to be in relation to the roller coaster that you just describing. I hope you'll come back sometime
Absolutely.
and fill us in on the inevitable twists and turns as this progresses.
I hope that when we have this conversation a year from now, that all the news is good and there's going to be lots of celebrating to happen and have.
Indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
As usual, you can find show notes on our website at bowencraggs.com. See you next time.